Delighted to see you all here. This is, as you'll have understood, the panel session of the conference, and we're going to talk about inclusive leadership, and we'll follow up on a lot of the themes you'll have heard about already from the keynotes and the workshops. If you've read the summary in the workbook, you'll see that we'll be discussing issues today such as shifting the status quo. There's a lot of vested interest in things not changing greatly. The benefits of changing the status quo, and methods to deliver it successfully. And in the previous workshop that I attended, there was lots of talk about mentorship and strategies indeed, if we are to change things, how we change them effectively. So we'll be talking about that as well. So how are we going to structure this panel? I'll start off by asking each of the panel members to introduce themselves. I met them about 10 minutes ago, so it's not appropriate for me to introduce them. Then the second round will be, I'll suggest a question or a theme for each of the panel members to talk about, and they're going to talk for around up to 5 minutes on that theme. And then a key bit of the panel is where you get a chance to ask questions of the panel. That's the third round, if you like. And then the fourth round, I hope there'll be time for me just to come back to the panel and just to invite them to deliver a kind of call for action, what they'd most like to see happen in the particular area of interest that they have in this field. So I hope that sounds sensible to you all. I'm really looking forward to hearing what our panel has to say. So let's start with introductions. Ramsey, if we could start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. My name is Ramsey Fawaz. I'm a professor of English at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I've been teaching there for 13 years. I was hired in the field of queer studies and American cultural studies, and all of my work is really focused on the relationship of radical left-wing social movements and popular culture.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Neda Silman. I've been working in the field of international education for well over 15 years now. Gosh, don't make me count. And I am currently the Health, Safety, and Wellbeing Manager at the Institute for Study Abroad. You know, I have a keen interest in inclusion in the varied roles that I've carried in international education. I've always worked with students and with faculty and with staff in terms of training and accommodating both the staff and the students. So yeah, I'm very excited to be here and talk about this today.
My name's Ken Hassel. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you all. I think most of the vitals were in the biography in the little pamphlet. So I want to talk just for a minute about my unusual background. I was always been kind of an outlier. I identify as queer. I'm always looking for alternative ways of thinking about things. I was a laborer for 10 years of my life. I was a biker. I've been homeless. I drove a cab for a while in Chicago and had a knife put to my throat. So these are different kinds of things I've experienced. The last thing I ever thought I would be doing is as a professor. So that's enough, I think.
Thank you, Ken.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Sarah Filson, and I am a doctor, actually, in infectious diseases and microbiology, and I work currently in Northwest London in a very diverse area of the city. My main interest in relation to what we're discussing today is actually primarily leading towards tackling health inequalities, which obviously we've seen a lot over the last couple of years, especially from the pandemic. And I also have a particular interest in addressing some of the things that we've seen caused by structural racism and having conversations, honest conversations with people like yourselves and people like the people on the panel, in order to work together to kind of get some social justice.
Okay, thank you so much for those introductions. So Ramsey, we corresponded. You talked about some of the recent diversity challenges you had in the classroom. I'd love to hear a bit more about that. And you also talked about the thinking that you've done around the current attack on DEI and what might be behind that. So perhaps if you could expand on that for us as well.
Yeah, so this semester I've been teaching an amazing group of students from UW-Madison, and I've spent 13 years teaching queer studies courses on AIDS activism, where many of the students are prepared to talk about very difficult, very painful problems around inequality, and around marginalization and collective oppression, et cetera. But in study abroad, you get a much broader spectrum of students, many of whom have never studied or talked about those things. And so in many ways, I noticed this semester, especially in the political climate in the United States, that many of my students were very triggered by some of the things that we were talking about and felt sort of like almost personally attacked, even when they were not being attacked, right? And I've had to do like a huge amount of emotional labor to sort of like help the students understand that talking about difficult, painful realities about history does not have to implicate them as bad people, right? That doesn't mean that they are bad. It simply means that things have happened that we have to confront. And so if this is the right time, I thought I would name a couple of things that kind of came to my mind as a result of that teaching process. I said this in the last panel. I think that this is a really exciting moment where the attack on the notion of diversity, equity, and inclusion is going to force all of us that are invested in those values to actually completely reevaluate the approach that we've been taking. Like DEI, I said this in the other panel, works at its best when it is a set of institutional structures that protect a variety of marginalized people. And marginalization could mean lots of different things. You could be a white male who is marginalized by virtue of your class or by being disabled or whatever. Like, there's many different kinds of marginalization. DEI works best when it is protecting people institutionally from hate speech, from being unduly fired, et cetera. Where it fails miserably, and I say this with love to your generation because I think you guys are really, really good at this, and it backfires, is when it functions as a moral geography of dividing the world between good and bad people. Like, it has become used as a way to say, like, some people are evil and privileged, you are awful, most of what you have to say is illegitimate. Those of us who've been marginalized have an experience so unique to us that it makes us special, and because you've denigrated us, we're gonna now elevate ourselves above you. It's such a bad look. And people on the other side look at you and they're like, you're not actually better than me. Like, flipping the script does not actually destroy the structure that we hate. Like, it merely represents our own will to power. Most of us who are engaged in the discourse of DEI as a moral geography are usually coming from elite places. We go to great schools, we've had a lot of resources. It's very hard for people to look at us and say, you're marginalized, you go to Columbia. You know, like, it's a bad look. So number one, I think the moral geography has to disappear. And it has to be replaced, number two, with a genuine understanding that diversity is simply a fact of human life that we all have to negotiate. It is not a good thing, it is not a bad thing, it's a neutral, benign reality. You can be a room with 50 black people who came from the Bronx, and none of them will be anything like each other. Every person in this room has had that experience where you finally got to be with people who seem all like you, like all queer people or all trans people, and you're like, I hate half of these people. They're so annoying, right? And you realize that difference doesn't simply break down along the lines of identity. We are different in terms of our temperament, our personality, our preferences, our spiritual worldview. It's difference all the way up, all the way down. So to me, the project for people who are teaching today is to train young people to see that diversity is a phenomenological problem of the universe that has to be negotiated with as many different approaches as possible. And the study and unpacking of inequality is one of them that is very important, but not the only one. And the last thing I would say for now, and we'll talk more in Q&A, and this is gonna sound really weird, is like, there is a deep psychological problem that we're all dealing with collectively, which is that we are living in a very dysfunctional, toxic society, and many of us are not actually able to negotiate difference because we're not doing well mentally. Like, we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not learning language to deal with our emotions and feelings. So when I look at some of the people in my classes who've been very resistant to some of the ideas that we're talking about, even when I've created a very safe space, I'm thinking, like, these are students who feel that their ego is being attacked. They feel that they're being told that they're bad people. And I'm like, this is a problem way beyond my class. Like, this is a problem of, like, a lot of you guys of your age are growing up in a society that's telling you that you need to watch everything you say, that if you say the wrong thing, you're gonna be obliterated and annihilated. So, like, in order for us to actually absorb the idea that we're different and we need to negotiate it, people have to heal. They have to work on themselves. And so level 3 is that I think universities need to invest hugely in creating a mental health apparatus that is not just about dealing with trauma, but giving students the emotional skills to receive the knowledge that they encounter in class in an open-hearted and loving way. And I find that I'm taking on that labor now. As, like, I'm doing the work of the therapist, and I don't mind to a degree, but I think, like, I don't want to only do that work, you know? And I think that that's like a third layer. So anyway, I hope that makes sense. Sorry I went on probably longer than 5 minutes, but.
I thought it was perfect. I don't know about you. And in fact, you led in beautifully to what Nada's going to talk about, I think, about the importance of training and support within education institutions. So over to you, Nada.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I was actually going to step in, but I really liked what you were talking about, so I wanted you to continue. But yes, you know, where I work, one of our commitments is inclusive excellence. And it's wonderful. You hear inclusive excellence, you think, great. But what does it mean? You know, I think I'm still trying to answer that right now. I don't know that my organization or any organization can really answer that. But I wanna separate two things out here. We talk about DEI, EDI, however you call it, equity, diversity, inclusion. What do these things mean? I went to a conference about a couple of years ago. Somebody said something that really stuck with me, and I thought it's the best way to separate out equity and inclusion. Equality is being invited to the party. Everyone gets invited to the party, right? We all want to get invited to the party. Inclusion is belonging at the party. And how do we make people feel like they belong somewhere? This then comes down to really what Ramsey was alluding to, which is structural changes, institutional changes, things that we can put in the institute that makes you all feel that we genuinely believe that you belong there and that we feel that way too, as educators, as leaders, whoever we are. A lot of what I see across the board, some of it can come across as performative. I don't know if some of you can see that or can feel that. I certainly can. You know, we all come from different diverse backgrounds, and, you know, walking into a room and they tell me, you know, they really believe in diversity and equity and inclusion, sometimes it feels really performative because actually there's no policy that tells me you feel that way. There's no training you're offering to show me that you're trying to push institutional change. So yeah, when we're talking about inclusive leadership, we're talking not just about the leaders of teams, we're not just talking about those that are leading students, teaching our students, we're talking about the organization. We're talking about the very fabric of where we're attending as students or where we are as staff members. We want to make sure that these places are putting in the correct terminology. And I mentioned this actually in the session just before this. Our job descriptions when we send them out, application processes for students. When you're applying to an institute, you want to make sure that this place fits with the ideals that you hold true, but that it's not performative, that after you read those things, inclusive excellence or whatever else it is, that, you know, they're emulating this, they're showing this to you, there's training in place, there's classes in place, there's mental health support that can help you through all the things that are coming up as you live in this new environment or in this new educational setting. What can we do? How can we practically make this happen? Like I said, policy changes. We need to make sure there's policies that talk about how we accommodate for different staff members, for students, reasonable adjustments, forms to say, is there anything you need to make us aware so that we can make this a safe space for you, a welcoming space for you? Because if we were to think about it by ourselves, if I was to think about every single person in this room on my own without you disclosing something to me, I would not be able to think of every single accommodation I would need to put in place for you all. I would not need to think of the language I need to use and teach myself, by the way, make sure that I'm aware of all the language that would be appropriate to use in here. So yeah, we're constantly going to be learning. Are we ever going to reach inclusive excellence? Personally, the answer to that is no for me, because inclusive excellence truly is that you're trying.
Nada, thank you so much. I think that's an early contender for the 2027 conference theme. I think 2026 is already planned, but moving beyond the performative. So thank you very much for those thoughts. Ken, when we corresponded in preparation for the panel, you expressed the concern that much, again, following on, I think, from what we just heard, much of what is branded as change is built upon prevailing norms. So the status quo is fundamentally unaltered. So I'd be very interested in your thoughts on what we might do to break this cycle. And the other thing I was keen to hear more from you about, as someone who studied fuzzy or vague logic as an undergraduate, I'm interested in your thoughts on how we move away from binary ways of thinking. Over to you, Ken.
Wow. My thinking right now is fuzzy. So I think we suffer from, and I've used this term a number of times, from venereal disease, that is veneer of wood on furniture. And so what we do is we tend to kind of drill into that veneer and not go below it and not really see the structure of the furniture itself. Is it rotten? Is it unusable? And so what we need to do, I think, on a regular basis is go much deeper than that. And so when we can take the example of DEIB or DEIA, whatever way we want to go, and think about, I mean, there are a lot of assumptions I think we make about the meaning of those terms. Like we inherently understand what equity or equality is. We inherently understand what inclusion is and what diversity is. And I think we have to go much deeper than that and go into reading material that's very critical about these ideas. For instance, the concept of inclusion, that to me doesn't connote but denotes the idea that there's an existing kind of structure that people need to fit into, that we're being included into something that's there already. And it's a structure that can be really harmful. It can be very welcoming, but it can also be exclusive and harmful. And I'm trying to think where I go from here.
Well, I was interested in your thoughts on moving away from binary divisions. I wonder if you could say more on that.
Yeah, and the whole idea of binaries is a real problem because it's something that's really, I think, developed fully. It's probably always been there, but particularly in modernism, which is an 18th century concept, science supplanting religion as a source of truth, and science is all about sequestering things in unrelated groups. I mean, think about when you go to college, you're majoring in something, and you're doing that oftentimes with the methodologies and so forth to the exclusion of other areas, and so you don't see the interrelatedness of things. And modernism is very much about creating absolute binaries. It's either good or bad, it's black or white, it's male or female. And in that kind of world, we don't see the integration of the two. We don't see, in fact, the space between them, which can be as important as those separate binaries. So it creates this kind of factional world where we are kind of seeing things as either like us or unlike us. And we see it in those black and white terms. I mean, I would talk a little bit later about how we might approach remedying those things, but I think that's enough for now.
Thank you so much, Ken. So in healthcare, we deal with extraordinary uncertainty, and we have to find a way to manage that. We deal with extraordinary diversity as well. Sarah, I wonder if you'd like to share some thoughts about the work that you're doing within the NHS to promote inclusive leadership.
Sure, no problem. So I first just wanted to acknowledge everything I've just heard before me. What I was really hearing in what has already been spoken about, it's about the fact that we need a cultural shift, and we need a structural shift, and we need a shift in the way we think about these things. I think that's very true. On a day-to-day basis, I see the effects of many of the injustices and the inequalities within the system that lead to patients, for example, presenting later with things that perhaps could have been prevented within the community. And one of the things that I know can help with this, and I think one of the things that already exists within the system that we live in, are the fact that we need to work together more in terms of bringing people in and making people feel like they belong. And it's not just about kind of people from, say, for example, backgrounds like mine, doing the work in order to educate others or to, you know, change the system. It's also about working together with people on the other side. So kind of working in the grey, I guess, is one of the things I'm saying, not the black or the white, but the grey. And one of the ways I think that works quite well is through allyship. I think it's a really important concept. Another thing I think is really important is mentorship and sponsorship, which I know that the women before talked about. I think it's these kind of tools we already have within the system that actually we can continue to work with to improve the system the world within which we live. It's very tricky at the moment because I know we're living in times that seem very, I don't even know what the word for it is, uncertain, I guess. I really hate that word because it's very cliche, but we are living in very uncertain times, and I think sometimes you can rely on certain things that have worked before. Sometimes you need to reinvent the playbook and do things differently. But I do think there needs to be like a meeting in the middle, and you know there are various different things that definitely I've heard today that I'm going to take with me and that I've learned from listening to students, panelists, and the keynote speaker today. But yeah, I'm excited that we're here having these conversations still in 2025. To an extent, most of us would hope that by this time we didn't have to have these conversations, but equally, it's nice that we are having these conversations, especially considering everything else that's going on outside of this circle.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We'll move on to the questions shortly, but I'd just like to ask a follow-up to you there, Sarah, if I may. I don't know how long ago it was that Julian Tudor Hart coined the inverse care law, the idea that people who need care most are the least likely to get it. So that's a long-term problem with the NHS. So someone who works in the NHS, do you feel that the NHS is really addressing that problem, really taking it as seriously as it needs to be taken?
That's a very good question. I mean, one of the things that we're trying to work on, and I think there have been some good changes over the last couple of years, especially since 2020 and the pandemic. But there needs to be a shift, and you'll hear NHS leaders talk about this a lot in relation to the shifts that we're trying to achieve, and that's a shift from hospitals to community, that's a shift from analog to digital, that's a shift from management and treatment to prevention. But all of these things can't happen unless we also kind of include the communities we're trying to work with, unless we have diverse leaders, unless we have people who really understand that actually we can't continue to do what we've done before because it hasn't worked, and what can we do differently. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done, but also there are some good things that have happened. I think it's worth acknowledging where we've come so far.
Great, thank you.
Can I actually just say something on that note? During the pandemic, I worked at a startup medical school in Kent, the Kent Medway Medical School. And the leadership that was being put together was quite diverse, to be fair, because it was a startup medical school. And because there was such diversity in the leadership from inception, before we had our inaugural students, which, by the way, they're reaching their 5-year mark now, so the first 100 set of doctors are going to go out into the world. They were talking about decolonizing the curriculum, which was an incredible part it was such a central part of when they were working out the academics of it all, because they were talking about how the lens in which they viewed medicine, and medicine had been taught historically, was from your patient is going to be somebody that is white-skinned, and all of these symptoms that you are aware of, they actually apply only to this kind of person. But they're forgetting about all the different diverse types of set of people with different sets of backgrounds that will present different symptoms, that will present in a different way. And so that is something that they really, really built into the curriculum that I thought was incredible, and not many other medical schools were doing that. But that's, again, one way that inclusive leadership can really make a change.
Thank you so much. So let's move over to the questions, Rebecca.
All right. If you have a question, you can raise your hand and we'll go ahead and bring around a microphone. Otherwise, you can go onto our Slido That's slido.com, SGLC 2025, and you can ask a question via Slido.
Hi, my question is for Dr. Filson. So I'm a public health student, and like one thing that I found really difficult is to convince people who don't necessarily have a background in health to engage in conversations around health inequalities. For instance, like my research right now is focused on like physiological differences of like how medications react differently in the male body versus a female body. And actually getting people who aren't in the health field to engage in those discussions, and then have physicians advocate for their patients based off different physiological functions. I just want to ask you because I'm not familiar with the UK system, what is the NHS doing to maybe address that? Or in your field, what have you seen that has worked to get people from outside the field to engage in those conversations?
I think that's a really good question, and I think it's a question that most public health practitioners struggle with, because it's about kind of how do you bring people with you. And I guess that's a question for all leadership. Whenever you're trying to change something, whether it be social change or you're trying to implement a new technology or whatever it is, you have to bring people with you. And how do you do that? And for me, and I think this is something that, you know, as a doctor, you almost learn to do almost naturally, is finding common ground with people. So I think earlier on I heard Ramsey talk about the fact that you know, you need to spend time with people that perhaps you don't like, or that you might not necessarily politically agree with, in order to really find common ground and move forward as a collective. And I think that's very true in relation to trying to get people on board in relation to anything in terms of public health promotion. It's one of the things that I definitely try and do when working with whatever it might be.
Can I say something to that, actually? I'm not a medical professional, but I do study and teach a lot about the history of AIDS activism, and I think something that's important to remember is that when you're trying to get somebody to visibly see an inequality that is not present for them, because it's just not part of their everyday world, one really good strategy among others is to start by asking them about their own experiences. Like, there's no human being in the West who has not in some way experienced some kind of friction with the medical system, that has not experienced at some point or another, like having some claim denied, or this or that or the other. And so if you're trying to get someone to see that there's medical inequality towards disabled people, or the differently abled, or trans people, or whatever, it doesn't work by saying, why are you so awful that you don't understand that trans people suffer? Like, most of you can't get out of your own heads. You're worried about your grades so much, right? Like, how do you imagine that some person you don't know is suddenly going to be keyed into an inequality that has nothing to do with them? What you can ask is, like, what do you experience? I'm going to give a random example. It's like, I saw a trainer for 4 months. I love him. He's a bodybuilder. He uses steroids. And we were talking about issues of trans healthcare. I mean, that's like a normal thing among many bodybuilders. And he's very open-minded, but has never really thought about the medical needs of trans people. And I said to him, well, don't you illegally get hormones to build your body? And he was like, oh yeah, that's true. And I was like, wouldn't it make your work easier as a bodybuilder if it was legalized and regulated, so that you had access to good steroids that are not going to damage your body, and you could work with a doctor? He was like, oh yeah. And I'm like, that's the same thing as trying to get hormone replacement therapy. And it blew his mind. Like, he was like, oh my God. I was like, bodybuilders should be in line with trans people, right? Like, politically. But so, I mean, to go back to your point, like, the way you get these things to change is you create surprising and unexpected coalitions between people. AIDS activists did not argue that only gay people and the homeless and IV drug users should get access to medical care. They said, well, healthcare is a human right. Everyone should get it. Everyone should be able to get treatment for HIV. And so they brought people along. And a big mistake we make in social justice politics today is we single out certain marginalized groups that we happen to have preference for, or we like them, or we think they're the worst off. And to build an entire health politics around 3% of the population of trans people doesn't make sense. Saying to the population at large, The interests of trans people are completely aligned with yours. And if you are uplifted, so will trans people, right? Like, that's a compelling argument that people can receive if it is handed to them. But telling people, like, you're privileged and you have everything you want, why don't you figure it out, is not gonna, it just doesn't work. That's just basic human psychology, by the way.
Who's next?
So first off, hi, my name is Miguel, and I'm from the College of New Jersey. I'm in my second year, and I'm studying business management. And my question for the panelists would be, like, you all are from very diverse backgrounds. All of us in this room, everybody, every human is very diverse in their own way. And I just wanted to ask, how have you managed to be your authentic self among a world that pushes you to not be? Like, you know, we're always trying to assimilate, code switch, whatever, to be able to fit whatever the employer or the company or whatever industry they want. And so how have you managed to maybe use those tactics while also being able to stay true to yourself and whatever identity you identify with, or whatever your background, your cultural background is? How do you embrace that maybe at work or things like that, while also, amidst the world that's pushing? And of course, I'm from the US, so it's kind of like all the politics, all of that is kind of going against many things. So I just wanted to know your perspectives on that, and maybe if you can inspire us on how to continue being.
I think it's a great question. Ken, why don't you kick off?
I think, again, this is kind of an idea of simplicity, in that we think of ourselves as one being, and that we can find this one being at a certain point in our life, and it all comes together. And I don't think that happens. I'm old. I'm 78 years old, and I'm still trying to find who I am and where I belong or where I don't belong. And so I think this is an ongoing process. It evolves over time, and if we're really open to things, it's an ongoing process and keeps going, and we never resolve things. And I think that's one thing in the West that we have difficulty with, is we want denouement on everything. It's almost like we're living in a play, and there's some conclusion to that play that will happen to us, and we'll fully understand our lives. And I don't think that's possible. I don't think that's the reality of life. And I think we've been talking about the complexity of not only groups within groups of people, but within ourselves, and struggling with that. So that's kind of my response.
Did anyone else want to come in? Yeah, Nada.
I'm happy to. I was going to say, I don't know that I'm comfortable or uncomfortable. I think that's what I would put it down to. Am I comfortable or uncomfortable? I think all the versions of me are me. How I am at home is one way, how I am at work is one way. They're all very different. What I really can say to that is that I do adapt to my environment. So if I'm speaking to somebody that requires me to speak a certain way or requires me to assist them in a certain type of way, I will adapt to that environment to accommodate that person or to accommodate that room. That's as close as I can get to that. But really, all the different versions of me, that's what they are, whether I'm at work or not. What I can say, though, is throughout the years, my confidence to live comfortably with that has changed. I wasn't always as confident to be the different versions of me and recognize that. As I get older and hopefully wiser, I would hope, I would like to say I'm living better within that comfort of who I am in these different environments.
Say something to that? I'm sorry, I can't not answer this question, considering how I'm dressed. I want to remind everybody, you enter this world with some style that is yet to be discovered, that is utterly unique to you. every one of us is like a little intricate snowflake that is trillions of different experiences, moments, encounters that have shaped you the way you are, which is what makes your unique perspective inherently valuable. And the work that we do to suppress that in order to be liked by other people is like one of the most self-destructive and also world-destructive practices that we do, because we rob the world of our complete, unique, like specificity. So it's like the way that I have become myself is just to constantly be striving to be more self-actualized, to be like, why do I see the world the way I do? Like, why does it seem that people are fascinated by that? How do people respond to me? And when I was growing up as a very visibly queer person who takes up a lot of space and is very loud, people felt that they had the right to comment about me all the time, good, bad, or ugly. It's like the amount of times I've been told, like, lower your voice, you're too this, or you're too that, you're too whatever. But the one beautiful thing about that was that it made me really self-aware of how I present in the universe. And instead of being cowed or of shrinking, I remember being able to discern when people were giving me feedback that was loving and that was about making me more myself, and when people were trying to contain me. And when I figured out the difference, I just started to accentuate everything about myself, my style, that brings joy to other people. And then, as you said, I adapted the parts that sometimes stress people out or overwhelm them. And that's the process of becoming yourself, is negotiating how to be the most incandescent version of yourself in relation to others. Like, that's your job, right? So everything about like the way I dress and the way I speak is like, it's me times 1,000, but also in a way that I know other people will enjoy, and that it will bring them joy. And so like, that is your one job. Become that thing, and wherever you go in professionally, you will find a place where people are obsessed with that. Like, I competed for 250 jobs till I got my job at UW-Madison. That's how competitive the field is. And I was always a bridesmaid and never a bride, because people were like, you're amazing and scary. Like, I would go to so many, I would give campus visit, meaning I would give a job talk, and people would be like, you're so dazzling, and but like, you're so scary. And I would always get second place. And when I went to Madison, the people watched me give my talk, and they're like, we're obsessed with you, right? And I've been there for 13 years, and there's a reason. So it's like, you don't have to suffer being in places where you do not belong. Like, sometimes it's not worth it to beg to belong. It's like, I gotta go. I'm gonna go find where I do.
Find your place, Eddie. Let's have our next question. Thank you.
Hello. This is for any one of you, but you guys talked a lot about uncertainty, and that kind of got me thinking. Like, imagine this all gets into place and everything like gets better. I feel like it'll be like the opposite. The people that disagree with it would have platforms and talk, and it just feel like it'll flip-flop forever. And I feel like people are getting kind of like, at least some people are getting tired of hearing this, and it's exhausting, and it leads to anger, arguments, and frustration, like losing hair. Is there an end in sight, or will we ever get there, or will it ever get better?
Who'd like to go at that?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah, please do.
When you talk about, I mean, I know that you're saying that we're talking about uncertainty. Uncertainty about the field, or just general uncertainty of the future?
The future, I would say. Yeah.
Okay.
I know I'm talking a lot. I'm sorry.
No.
I have to, and you can jump on. I don't think that we'll ever stop being uncertain. I mean, that's just what I don't think we'll ever stop learning. I don't think we're ever going to reach a point where we all agree on something. I don't think it's that final. That's, yeah.
So, oh yeah, please.
Well, I just think uncertainty is exciting. You know, the idea that we have to have things all mapped out as a kind of Western construct of things that are very teleological or in kind of in this straight line. That's not how life functions. And again, the complexity of life and constantly growing. If the universe is growing at an accelerated rate at every moment, then everything within that universe is also growing. That's why I don't believe in authorities and experts, because it's just too complicated to be an authority in a particular subject. It doesn't mean you can't be really good in it, but do you know everything about it? No, you don't, and you can't possibly. And so that uncertainty allows a kind of open life for us to start. You can be kind of queer or inquiring in terms of that open space, not being in place, but an open space that allows you to think differently and to decolonize, really. And I think that's the only way we're going to change in this life in terms of the way structures are created.
I think I understood, maybe I misunderstood your question, but I thought you were saying that we're on this panel arguing for a particular version of inclusive communities. And your suggestion is if we're successful, the people who don't like that model of inclusive communities will want to run their own panels and say, society is too inclusive, isn't it? So I thought that was your challenge. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that. Ramsey or Sarah?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting concept, actually, because I think you're right. For every value or point, there's a counterpoint or counterpoint, and that's just human history and human living in a diverse world. However, I do think that in terms of this idea of the fact that, we may get to a point where actually we're all very happy and we're in a very diverse, inclusive society, and that there'll be people who will still have a counter view to that. Yes, we definitely will have that point. But I think the idea that we are talking about at the moment is a view where actually we're trying to be inclusive of the majority, I guess. I'm going to sound a bit like a Labour politician now, but being like for the many as opposed to the few. And I think that's kind of where I see this going, in that you're trying to get to a point in history where the majority of people are in a better position. Whether or not we'll get there is another matter. And I think, people often think in a very Western-centric way and forget the fact that actually, if you look at global populations and the way in which global populations are changing, we won't really be living in a very Western-centric way in probably a couple of decades' time, I would imagine, because populations will be bigger in areas of Asia and Africa. And so I think it's important to think about that when we're thinking about where we're going in the future.
I mean, I would co-sign everything people said. I actually understood your question, tell me if I'm wrong, simply that you were like, everything looks like it sucks. And it seems that all we do is yo-yo back and forth. Like in the United States, it feels like 1 minute we have a Democratic president, then we have a Republican, then we have that's kind of what I got the sense of. And so I want to actually answer this with a little bit more quotidian way, which is just to agree with everyone, history is fundamentally and phenomenologically unpredictable. Our job is to learn to move with unpredictability and to live with it. By the way, watch Inside Out 2. That's literally what that movie is about. It's about how anxiety is a product of the desire to control an uncertain future. And if we develop the mental training to be open, to be excited, as you said, about the uncertainty that it opens out into all these possibilities, then you can neither be an optimist nor a pessimist. You can be a pragmatist, open to all possible thoughts. But I want to respond to this idea of polarization. It sounded like you were saying, it seems like we're just always yo-yoing back and forth. And I said this to the students in my class so many times this semester. You guys, if you want to exit a polarized situation, whether it's in your interpersonal life or our national politics, one or both sides have to start behaving differently. It's that simple. If we're using the United States as an example, the US is not gonna break out of the flip-flopping of Democrat and Republican until people stop affiliating with either of those positions or decide to act differently. So I wanna use an example from my classroom this semester, and I really apologize to the students because you know the example I'm gonna use, and I'm not calling anyone out. There's a little bit of a divide in one of my classes that tends to be very gendered, where some of the men in the class, who I think some of them have conservative Trump ideals, and then there are progressive students, they're always worried that they're gonna say something that's gonna offend people. So they're always prepared to offend, and they secretly kind of wanna offend people, even while they're saying that they don't. And then there's a lot of progressive students who are waiting to tell those people that what they're saying is fucked up. Right? And so we're polarized. So there was an incident in one of my classes where one of those students said something totally innocuous, just took a thing that was no big deal, and then a bunch of students in my class dissected what he said. And the minute they did, he looked at the other boys and was like, see, I can't say anything. I can never say anything. And I stopped everybody and I was like, why are you playing this theater? this tired theater. Like, some of you have already decided you're gonna offend everybody. Some of you have already decided that you're gonna morally tell them that they're wrong. Like, why don't you just stop? Like, why don't you just sit back and receive what people are offering and respond in an unpredictable and uncertain and open way, rather than deciding in advance to preempt what everybody has to say? So I think, like, one response is that, like, we could change the dynamic you're talking about if somebody started to decide individually or collectively to behave differently. And I think we're reaching like a critical point where we have to, otherwise it's suicidal.
I'd like to make one little point, and it's very brief. I don't know if any of you have read Sarah Ahmed, but she talks about the path that can become a pathology.
Thank you, Ken. Other questions, please?
Hi, this question is for Ms. Nada, if I'm correct. I understand that you don't necessarily believe this inclusive standard is one that can fully be reached, but I'm a strong believer in the sense that your mindset is either your casket or your greatest asset. What do you think about this?
I don't think that we can't reach inclusive, I don't think we can reach inclusive excellence, true. But I don't think that the attempts are not possible. I think that is the inclusive excellence, the fact that we continue to strive, we continue to try, we continue to change our thinking about it. And that actually goes back to the comment before about, you know, when are we ever going to reach clarification on this? When are we going to stop talking about inclusion? The fact is, there's always going to be a marginalized group of people. At some point, it's existed throughout history. It will continue to exist. The more inclusive spaces are becoming occupied, the more somebody is going to feel excluded. Why do we talk about inclusion? It slowly becomes less about the people and more about the way we think of inclusion. We need to stop thinking like we belong in this space and other people don't belong there. What needs to change here is that we all believe we all belong in a certain space rather than feeling like we're losing out. Oh, hey, if 5 more people are going to be in this institution, that means that's 5 less spaces for me. No, that's just not how, that's not actually how it's working. I don't know if that really answers the question, but yeah, inclusive excellence is the trying. Mm-hmm.
There's a line in To Kill a Mockingbird, I think it's Scout, says trying to do the right thing is the right thing. Other questions?
Hi, I'm Destiny. I go to Columbia University in New York, and I love this panel. We all love this panel. But y'all have talked about how we're in a factional, divided world. We're polarized. We often feel censored. And I'm curious to what does maybe a liberating leadership look like, where we show up for each other in solidarity and across our intersectional lines, because you can have DEIA without solidarity and commitment to supporting each other's struggles, but solidarity requires that we have diverse spaces.
Anybody? If you'd like to start on that one. Ken, go on. Would you like to answer that? Solidarity?
It's very interesting about solidarity because in solidarity, I think there's a kind of implicit understanding that everyone within that solidarity is going to be the same. Mm-hmm. So there's this concept that then is very essentialistic, right? It's very stereotypical, and that's one thing I think we didn't talk about is stereotypes. So we need to understand within that there are individuals and the complexity of that in terms of individuals, and not seeing a group of people as simply all the same. Again, that's kind of essentialism, so that's what I would respond to that.
Thank you.
I can add to that. First of all, Columbia, there's a lot going on. I hope you're doing okay. It's such a good question, so necessary for this moment. Number one, to build on what you just said, like solidarity is a political practice of coalition that requires not worrying about whether you like the people that you're in solidarity with. This is a huge problem on the social justice left, where people feel like we already have to have the same values. We already have to like each other. I have to like the way you live. Like, girl, no. It's like you're coming together for shared goals. Solidarity is not the same as friendship. But friendship is a basis for solidarity. So one, you have to start by asking, like, what are our shared interests, number one? You will discover that you have shared interests with people who are nothing like you, who might even live a life that is anathema to you. Many working class Americans did not vote for Trump, but some of them did, and some of the people who did vote for Trump have more interests aligned with you, a Columbia student, who's, I'm assuming, African American, than they do with a billionaire. But they don't see that because we've been telling them they suck. Right? So, like, getting over the fact that, like, you don't need to like the people you're in solidarity with, you need to have shared interests. Second, being able to articulate real goals and figuring out how you're going to accomplish it. The people who participated in AIDS activism, they were not worried about being politically correct. They were not worried about messing up pronouns. They were like, we need to get drugs into bodies. Like, we need to get people, like, into drug trials. So they were very thoughtful about the language they used. They were certainly not, like, sloppy, you know, but they were not worried about optics, right? And you guys are a generation that's so freaking worried about optics, right? And the funny part is, even though you're worried about optics, you're not so worried about when you don't look good. So you think about what's happened at Columbia. Like, at Columbia, the school is doing horrendous things. But also, during the protests, it wasn't as though the protesters were always really good at explaining why what they're doing matters. They couldn't understand that some people were looking at them and being like, you're so privileged. Who are you to over-identify with the suffering of people in the Arab world? And, like, a real intelligent solidarity would be students saying, we understand why you might think that. Let us explain to you why it matters to us. But it didn't. They were like, we're morally superior and screw the rest of you. Well, guess what? It didn't work, right? Like, now the tables have flipped. So those are two. And the third, which is just interpersonal, and this is my hobby horse because I write a lot about mental health and the study of literature now in my new work. I'm writing a book about psychedelics and the study of literature. And it's like, you are not going to have any solidarity that's going to last if you yourself are not someone capable of maintaining relationships in your own life. Like, if you are conflict avoidant, if you do not develop deep friendships, if you do not have moments where the people in your life disagree with you and you process it, there's no way you're going to handle the discomfort of solidarity, which is a painful, continual process of recommitting yourself to people you might not like for your shared goals. So that's part three, is like, better start strengthening those friendships, better start making those phone calls and talk about those difficult conversations, because if you can't even do that with your best friend because you're worried they won't like you, like, give up on politics.
We just have one more question and then we'll do the call for action among the panel. So who's the lucky last question?
Hello guys, thank you guys so much for taking a moment to speak with us today. My name's Nick, I'm from Villanova University, Philadelphia area. And, hailing from a finance perspective, one of the least, inclusive areas possibly of the professional world, I was curious to hear what you guys thought about the change and shift between DEI towards DOI, which is more about reframing equity as opportunity, and what your thoughts were about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, have you got any thoughts on reframing it in that way?
Yeah, I mean, semantics, I guess. Gosh. I think thinking about the attack on DEI at the moment in the US is in some ways really difficult for me, because I spent some time in the US. I spent a year at Harvard and then came back to the UK. And one of the things I loved about being in the States at that time was actually the fact that the conversations around race, around social justice, seemed so progressive, and almost more progressive than the conversations that we were having here in the UK at the time. So to kind of be in a position now where we're kind of looking at it in the other way, in that actually I think probably the conversations we're having in the UK at the moment are more progressive than those that are being allowed to be publicly had in the US. is really interesting for me. Opportunity instead of equity. My feeling in relation to kind of that is just that I don't think there wasn't a problem with it being called diversity, equity, and inclusion. So therefore, yeah, that's all I have to say about it. Sorry.
We're running short of time, I'm afraid. Let's do the call for action. So I'd like to ask each of the panel members, just in 30 seconds or so, what's the main thing, what's the big thing, what's the most important thing for them that we need to do to make progress in this kind of general area we're talking about, more inclusive communities, more inclusive leadership? Ramsey, why don't we start with you? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to be counterintuitive. I actually think that we need an elaborate K-12 mental health structure in which young people are trained how to deal with their feelings, to actually deal with conflict, to negotiate difference with people, to not be antisocial. You're a generation that, as a result of COVID and other realities, have become very antisocial. You avoid having arguments with each other. You avoid just like actually engaging with people who are not like you and then dealing with the effects. And I think that if people were trained from a very young age to have access to mental health infrastructure that allows them to do that, I think that that would be one step to that road. And I think the second is that we really have to recommit to the idea of spaces of public dialogue and debate. Like, universities need to become much more invested in teach-ins, in going out into their local communities and holding town halls that are not about yelling at a politician, but that are about people who normally wouldn't talk to each other, talking to each other. We have no major infrastructure now in the US where anybody talks to each other in public outside of social media. It rarely ever happens. So much misunderstanding happens because people don't encounter people who are not like them, and they also don't get to practice the skill of public disagreement. So I think, like, I see those two things as part and parcel of each other, of like a society recommitting to creating the infrastructure where from childhood to adulthood, people are always practicing negotiating their differences in public over things that matter.
Thank you. Nada.
I wasn't going to say that, but I really agree with that. Ditto. I would say, I mean, I'm coming from an institutional perspective, so I think for us to better serve students as staff members and faculty members, really what I would like to see is that inclusion, unconscious bias, those sorts of trainings are happening annually, because how can we actually be preaching that to all of you if there isn't enough awareness institutionally, organizationally in our structures? So really, I'd like to see a lot more of that happening, and rather than it being more of a lip service type of thing.
I think we have to be much more courageous and be willing to put ourselves out in situations that seem a little bit dangerous, if I may put it that way. I've done projects about people who work in factories. I did a project, I spent 11 years in Central Appalachia in the coal mining regions, working with people there. You find friendship, and you find interesting people, and people who can really help you understand life in all of these situations. I just got done with a project that I did in Southall, which is west of here, and it was with Somali and South Asian women, and I learned a great deal from that. So you really have to put yourself out there and meet different kinds of people, and you realize you have these things in common, but also recognize the fact that people are different. And that's okay. We don't have to find this kind of commonality. They're different. We can learn from each other, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that everybody's just said. And just to reiterate, I think it's really important that we work towards a point of inclusion or belonging. And I don't think there's one way to get to that point, I guess, is what we've learned from all of the conversations we've had today. I think there are multiple ways. I think we have multiple tools at our disposal, whether it be through allyship, networking, sponsorship, mentoring. There does need to be structural changes and leadership buy-in, but there also needs to be community partnership and community involvement in relation to making these changes. So I'm excited to see what you guys as future leaders do for us all. I'm really glad to see so many people here on a Saturday when the weather is I think our summer, the UK summer has just come and gone, by the way, guys. But it's really good to see you guys here actually having these conversations. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Just a thought on the opportunity equity discussion that we had, a thought to leave you with, a quote from Matthew Taylor, who said, "An egalitarian is a meritocrat who means it." Just something for you to think about. So thrilled at the way the panel went. Thank you so much for your contributions. Thanks to the audience, and hope you enjoyed it.
Well, thank you very much again, Graham, for chairing and moderating this panel today. And let's give another big round of applause to our lovely panelists. We have Sarah Ann Filson, Ken Hassel, Nada Silman, Ramzi Fawaz, and Graham Box.